Hi, my name is Julija Sukys. I'm a writer of creative nonfiction. Welcome to our virtual reading series. I'm an associate professor of English at the University of Missouri, where I teach creative writing. Today I'm going to read from my book, Siberian Exile, Blood War, and a Granddaughter's Reckoning. The book tells of my grandmother's 17-year exile to Siberia. In these pandemic days, I've been thinking a lot about family and survival. I've also been dreaming of travel again. So I thought I'd read from chapter 23, which tells of my trip across Siberia by train to try and find my grandmother's place of exile. So here we go. Chapter 23 from Siberian Exile. In 2010, I decided to try and find my grandmother's place of exile. I hoped that in going to Siberia, the place would change in my imagination. Perhaps, instead of thinking of Siberia only as a wound and a source of family trauma, I could come to see it as a real place of living people. I figured there had to be more to Siberia than gulags and graveyards. After all, it was also home to ancient nomadic cultures of reindeer herders, lost colonies of heretical Russian old believers, solitary grizzly bears, majestic mountains, and modern cities. So in preparation for my journey, I began to read and dream. Soon, instead of fear, I started to feel anticipation. Of my entire family, my cousin Darius was the only one who didn't tell me I was crazy for wanting to visit Olna's village. Other relatives voiced worries about food, safety, the harsh climate, and recent environmental nuclear disasters. Again and again, I heard you can't go there. Finally, with tickets booked and contacts made, I showed that I could. Only once Darius had agreed to travel with me, though, did everyone else breathe a sigh of relief. The summer of our trip to Siberia was Russia's hottest on record, with temperatures reaching the high 30s and low 40s Celsius. Forest fires burned throughout the country, but the blazes that the Russian government lamented as a natural disaster were nothing of the sort. Wetlands were drained and mined for peat. Huge territories had been handed over to private corporations, and the country's forest ministry was reduced to a skeleton staff of 12 individuals who were so swamped with paperwork they could not patrol the lands for which they were responsible. But now, the mismanagement of the countryside had begun to affect city dwellers. When we landed in Moscow in early August, the streets outside the airport were suffocating. Smoke and smog hung heavily in the air and weighed in our lungs. Health authorities cautioned citizens to remain indoors, to air condition their apartments, and to stay off the streets. Despite the warnings, Moscow's roads teemed with cars that spewed ever more fumes into the atmosphere. The death rate rose dramatically, and the city's top doctor reported 700 mortalities per day. That evening, my cousin and I boarded the eastbound train that would be our home for 4 days. Already exhausted from our journey to that point, we slept deeply until morning and awoke to the sight of birch stands and pine forests while we went rushing past. I sat in my bedclothes for hours, watching as the rolling landscape gave way to swampland and back. Darius, who lives among the redwoods of Northern California, marveled at the scrawny trees. The scent of smoke still seeped into our cabin through its sealed windows. My cousin and I had each brought copious amounts of reading material, anticipating boredom and long yawning stretches as we traveled across Russia. This was not the case. Instead, our time passed easily, and I found myself gripped by my cousin's stories about the grandmother he had known so much better than I. As he remembered her to me, Darius described how Olna had felt to the touch, how she'd moved, how easily she'd laughed. That night, after our first full day of train travel, I lay in my berth, listening to the wheels rumbling against the rails. I calculated that when my grandmother had made this very trip by cattle car, Olna had been 36, a year younger than I was that summer. Would I have survived a similar fate? Thanks so much. Be safe.